plaintiffs group that brought suit against the U.S. Department of Homeland Security because of their use of force in enforcing immigration law have decided to withdraw their challenge after the federal government went to the appeals courts and had a lower court's action reversed. Good morning. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop, and a lot of litigation between the federal government and the state of Illinois when it comes to the issue of immigration enforcement. And the most recent is a hearing yesterday in District Court, Northern District of Illinois, where plaintiffs groups, including members of the media and immigration activists, were essentially asking a judge to dismiss the case that they brought against the U.S. Department of Homeland Security over use of force. And this has generated a lot of interest, a lot of activity, but ultimately what came out of that hearing yesterday was the judge having another hearing set for January when they're going to come back and ultimately have a decision here soon after to decide whether to dismiss this case. So let's go to some of the the latest here in the courts, because the immigration debate, also including the Secretary of State's office here in Illinois, critical of ICE and rental car companies when it comes to license plates. But we've also got immigration enforcement when it comes to CDLs being questioned, with state U.S. Congresswoman saying that she's willing to withhold federal funds from states like Illinois that may be flouting federal law when it comes to immigration enforcement and CDLs. So let's get to all of this, all right? I'll try to my hardest to keep this as concise as possible, because there's a lot here. So you have the plaintiffs in their case about excessive use of force, essentially saying that they want to have this case dismissed. And what that means is you have a hearing that happened yesterday where Judge Sarah Ellis heard from the plaintiffs saying they wanted it dismissed, and the federal government in the back and forth, essentially the federal government saying, what kinds of things are going to be unsealed in this, and how are we going to proceed forward in this case, because the federal government appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, or rather to the appeals court. Let me correct that. So last month, federal Judge Ellis sided with the plaintiffs, issuing a temporary restraining order against the federal government from using excessive force. And then you had the appeals court, at the federal government's insistence, reverse that lower court's order of the temporary restraining order against the use of force. So the federal government's got a preliminary victory out of the appeals court. And that's an indication of what ultimately the appeals court may do about the lower court's ultimate decision. So apparently the plaintiffs group said, we're just going to dismiss this case. So all the generated activity, the media activity, and the videos that came out, and the deposition of Gregory Bavino, a DHS official, all of that out, and the questions and the consternation and the debate about use of force, especially when it comes to the issue of how DHS can protect themselves from protesters who become violent. And that's something that also wraps in the conversation about the use of the National Guard, which we're still waiting on the courts to ultimately deal with. So all of this while you've got the courts also having to deal with the question of Illinois' migrant sanctuary policies that the Trump administration has sued Illinois over, saying they're unconstitutional. We'll see how that case plays out as well. So still a lot more to be done about what happens with the case here, challenging excessive use of force, because that hearing is now set for January 8th, where a judge will ultimately have more to say about the injunction they issued last month that was reversed by the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. But the plaintiffs group here, Chicago Headline Club, they put out a statement after the hearing yesterday, and here's what they had to say. They said, the Chicago Headline Club went to federal court to stand up for freedom of the press when federal agents tried to trample upon our constitutional rights. It's that simple, they said. Our organization backs reporters as they pursue fair, impartial, honest, and truthful journalism without fear or favor. Our court case accomplished what we wanted, a ruling that prevented federal agents from interfering with our right to cover the news. Reporters protesters and religious leaders faced tear gas, pepper balls, and other over-the-top actions perpetrated by federal agents during Operation Midway Blitz. We respectfully note the U.S. District Court Judge Ellis reviewed video and evidence and found the government's version of what happened during Operation Midway Blitz was flat out not credible. She said the federal government's aggressive activity shocks the conscience. As we noted earlier, the Headline Club wrote, Commander Bovino left town quickly once Ellis exposed the truth about Operation Midway Blitz actions and lies told by the federal agents. We expected an appeal and we moved to dismiss the suit. We'll take the win, and we're prepared to go back to court if federal agents once again threaten our sacred First Amendment rights. Today, the federal government argued in courts that we can't dismiss the suit and then file new action later if the government comes back and causes more harm in the future. As Judge Ellis noted, the view is contrary to the law. The federal government harms journalists in Chicago in the future. We and our attorneys will fight for our rights. So, again, you can see here the statement from the Chicago Headline Club that essentially saying, hey, we're going to sue again if we want, even though they had the appeals court reverse the order that they got in the district courts and the federal government saying they want to, continue with the case. So what happens with the hearing next week in this particular use of force case will be interesting next month, rather, whenever they have that hearing to ultimately determine if this case is going to be dismissed, first of all, and if the case is going to be dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can't bring the case again. So it might be dismissed without prejudice, meaning they can bring the case again and have all of this come back up. But obviously, when it comes to covering and news and First Amendment, being able to be there as a neutral observer, that's one thing. But when it crosses the line into getting into interfering with law enforcement activities, that's going to be an interesting question that I imagine this case might develop over time. So a lot more to watch on that here with Illinois in Focus. Moving on, though, with the other immigration issues, Illinois Secretary of State Alexi Giannoulias says he's cracking down on rental car companies for permitting ICE in their swapping and altering of license plates. Here is what Secretary of State Alexi Giannoulias had to say in a video message that he shared on social media yesterday.
Has received hundreds of public complaints about federal immigration agents using rental cars with swapped or altered license plates during large-scale deportation operations right here in Illinois. Let me be very clear. Swapping Illinois license plates is illegal, period. And no one, including federal agents, is above the law. That's why we sent formal notices to national rental car companies reminding them that if their vehicles are used this way, they will and can be held liable. When our investigation confirmed that ICE agents switched plates on a rented vehicle, we revoked that license plate immediately. We also issued a cease and desist letter to the Department of Homeland Security. The message is simple. If a vehicle is registered in Illinois, it must follow Illinois law, regardless of whether you are Homeland Security or a rental car company. This is about public safety, transparency, and accountability. So if you see vehicles with missing, masked, or mismatched plates, report it to our new Plate Watch hotline. Together, we're making it very clear. When it comes to protecting our communities, no one is above the law.
So again, that's the Secretary of State there laying out what he says is a big problem with federal agents masking license plates. And here's some of the letter that he shared yesterday that he says he sent back in October about swapping license plates on Illinois registration. And it goes on to say that there have been multiple reports of federal ICE agents swapping out license plates displayed on vehicles that are registered in the state of Illinois, and essentially just heard what the secretary had to say there. So clearly, he also sent a letter to 19 rental car companies, and we'll hear more about that, I imagine, as that story develops. But Secretary of State was also, part of our story yesterday concerning the CDL enforcement issue. And Congresswoman Mary Miller, we chatted with yesterday about that, says she's willing to withhold federal dollars over that CDL issue. So data that we got here at the Center Square from Illinois State Police showed nearly 1 in 5 CDL holders with English language proficiency infractions have licenses issued by the state of Illinois. Miller said that that's wild, and she also had her own sampling that she had done.
If you don't stop the funding to the states that are flouting our laws, they're not going to change. I have a bill, the Safe Driving Law Act, that will rescind half of the highway funding to states like Illinois that refuse to cooperate. Our highways are not safe. And I completely do not believe that number, 1 in 5. I have, in plain clothes, gone from truck stop to truck stop in my district, and I go to the cashier and I ask them this question: how many of the truckers come in here speak no English? And every single time they have told me almost all of them. And it's just outrageous. And the other thing, we have allowed illegals and foreigners to take these jobs from the American people. These used to be good jobs for people that didn't go to college. And we should restore the trucking industry back to the American people. And I want to go after the trucking companies is another thing that's hiring these people. And Illinois is quite a trucking hub. We've got so many freight rails that come into Chicago. And it's a trucking hub. Illinois is, and in the center of the nation, we definitely need to deal with this. It is a threat to the American people on the highways.
So I asked the Illinois Secretary of State's office for some information and what they would do about possible federal funds being withheld if Congresswoman Miller gets her bill across the finish line. They didn't necessarily respond to the issue of what would happen if Illinois lost those highway dollars, but the Illinois Secretary of State's office did say that the office takes the federal standards for commercial driver's licenses seriously, quote, because they are critical to road safety. A statement provided to me by the spokesperson for the Secretary of State's office says that we will continue enforcing federal requirements and working with our partners to ensure CDL holders in Illinois meet all licensing and safety obligations. The agency said CDL applications are not allowed to use a translator at any point in the licensing process, and it takes about 45 minutes for a test and requires continuous communication between the applicant and the examiner. And the spokesperson went on to say, if an applicant cannot understand or respond to questions asked by our staff, whether during testing or even at the counter when providing basic information, the process is stopped and they are not issued a CDL, according to the spokesman from the Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State's office giving me that statement, but yesterday when we talked with Congresswoman Mary Miller earlier, she answered the question of has she talked to the Secretary of State's office?
Well, they won't talk to me. They're completely uncooperative. And finally, I do not believe a thing that they say. They lie without shame. And, I think the facts speak for themselves. I've had multiple accidents in my own district of illegals that have driver's licenses and CDL licenses. And I've talked to victims' families. Not one Democrat has reached out to their family.
So Miller critical of the Secretary of State's office and also critical of Democrats. But if you look at the Secretary of State's office website when it comes to the CDL issue, and you can read up on how you can get a CDL, the website shows that only U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents can apply for a CDL. But the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals can be considered in that CDL application process. The federal DACA program, it was frozen earlier this year pending legal action. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Agency says that it will accept initial DACA requests, but they're not processing them at this time. Related federal documents remain valid until they expire unless individually terminated. So the federal agency just laying out what the status is of DACA. And you have Illinois U.S. Senator Dick Durbin He is on his way out. This is his final term. He's announced retirement, but he has reintroduced the DREAM Act. And if you've been following politics in Congress and Senator Durbin, you know you've heard about the DREAM Act for 24 years. It's a bipartisan bill that he's proposed for years, and it allows DACA recipients a pathway to legal status if they meet certain criteria. Among those criteria are no felonies, higher education, and such, but also passing English language proficiency tests, according to Durbin's office. He says they are teachers, nurses, doctors, and small business owners throughout our communities and in all 50 states. But because DACA hangs by a thread in the courts and many are not covered by DACA, they live each day in fear of deportation. This is a matter of simple American fairness and justice. Durbin's office says across the country, there's about 530,000 individuals who are active DACA status. So, again, just in this overall conversation about immigration enforcement, safe roads, when it comes to, license plates on vehicles that federal officials rent, can they remove those or obscure those for, safety purposes so they're not tracked and trying to enforce the law? You've got the ongoing court battles about the use of force and the National Guard and the state's migrant sanctuary policies. And then you've got the issue of CDL enforcement and whether or not people who know English are on the roadways with big rigs. So a lot of stuff going on here. Hopefully I've been able to distill it down so at least you know where the status of where everything's at and how we're moving forward here on this Friday with Illinois in Focus Daily. All right, each and every weekday morning with you. Greatly appreciate you guys' attention. Obviously, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us each and every day here with the Center Square. All right, we'll keep you guys informed. Don't forget to get the newsletter in your inbox. Go to thecentersquare.com.